this is for the year 13 group, and we have Azara hosting today's session. She'll be taking everyone through the entirety of the Economic Summer School, which is a series of 8 sessions. Today is the first one of those, and it's free to view on Facebook. The remaining 7 will be smaller group sessions held only on Zoom. And what we have is a series of economics related matters. The first one is focused on government's macroeconomic objectives. So Zara will be taking us through on that in just a moment. And just while she loads that up, a couple of other housekeeping points. So if you have any questions, please do ask those in the chat functionality within the Facebook live stream. We'll come and pick those up at the end and go through those in a dedicated sort of Q&A session. So Zara, if you're ready, shall we kick off?
Sure, let's do that. Hello everyone. So today we're going to be looking at the government's macroeconomic objectives. I'm going to tie it in a little bit with because that's something most of you would have done it in year 12. And going into year 13, you're going to be doing that in a little bit more detail, but focusing more also on the policies that the government can use in terms of achieving those macroeconomic objectives. So I think what I'll do is I'll link the two together and also link it to a few new topics that you would be covering in your year 13, which would be linked to the government's macroeconomic objectives. I will also use diagrams, so ADAS analysis, which is again something something you guys would have done in your year 12, but going and exploring that a little bit more into your year 13 content. So if we put that here as macroeconomic objectives, we have, as you would have done in your year 12, you've got economic growth, we also have low unemployment, followed by stable inflation. Remember, the inflation target from your year 12 was 2%. That here. Plus or minus 1%. Looking at the third one, again, something you would have done is the stable balance of payment. Now, when you did this in year 12, you would have only explored the current account in your year 12. Now, we're going to be looking at the other two as well. So you've got your current account, you have your capital account, and you have your financial account. Now we're going to be looking at all of these three in your year 13. We are also going to be looking at how the government must have a balanced budget. Looking at that, when we have a balanced budget, what are we looking at? We're looking at government spending being equal to the tax revenue that the government gets, right, through direct and indirect taxes. Again, something you would have done in year 12. Remember, direct taxes being income and corporation tax, and indirect tax being that from, for example, VAT. So here, the aim, the macroeconomic objective, or the aim or the goal that the government does try to get to is a balanced budget. So you want government spending being equal to tax revenue. We also want to protect our environment, and we also want to make sure that we have low inequality. Right, so these are our main macroeconomic objectives. And now you're going to be exploring some of them in more detail. For example, in your year 12, you explored economic growth, unemployment, inflation. Now you're going to be doing the balance of payment in more detail. You're going to be doing this in more detail, your government's budget. You're also going to be doing inequality in a lot more detail now. And I suppose it's very important to understand and know the relevance of COVID-19 in terms of your economic application. As you know already, let's put a quick reminder here for your exam technique, the stuff you need, points you need to work on from your year 12 knowledge. We have application, we have analysis, and we have evaluation. At this stage, most of you would know how to evaluate, must have seen it in papers, so I've done some in school as well, where you are looking at examining the extent to which the point that you have made is true. So we've got knowledge, which is, again, let's go over that quickly, your definitions, your economic terminologies all explained, the understanding of any economic terminology that's used in the question or that's relevant to the question. We have application, which is very, very important. Now, a lot of students miss out on this because they feel that they don't know enough, or they feel it doesn't carry a lot of marks, but it does. Now, when you're looking at your year 13 paper or going into year 13, the easy part in year 12 was when you were given an exam paper, you were already provided with a data response question where you were given certain, you were given graphs, charts, you were given figures, you were given, extracts from newspapers, and the questions were based on that. So your application came from the extracts that were provided to you in an exam. This is for year 12. In year 13, there's a slight difference going forward. And I'll tell you why I'm mentioning this. The difference is that, yes, you still have that data response where you've got, again, the figures, the extracts provided to you, and questions are based on that. But you also have, across your micro and macro both, you have a separate essay question, which is 25 marks now. So worth 25 marks. And out of the 25 marks, about 4 marks is worth application. What do I mean by that is you have to provide real world examples. So that essay is not linked to the data response that's already provided to you. This is something completely different on the side. So you can't get any application from the extracts for this. So again, you've got a section where you've got just data response. So your application comes from there, no problem. You pick up figures and text from there and you just back your answers up, and that's your application marks. But for your essay, which is your 25 marks question, which is completely separate from the data response, you have a choice, 1 out of 2 essays that you have to do, and it's worth 25 marks. 4 marks is application. Now, when we had, the recession back in 2008, a lot of questions were based on, a lot of questions expected you to apply a knowledge from there. So facts and figures that you knew from there in terms of, the impact on the macroeconomic objectives, for example. Growth fell by X amount, unemployment increase, decrease, and so a month, and so on. Now, with COVID-19, going around, there's a lot of real world knowledge that you can apply and use for your essays. The high chance of it coming up in your papers as well for, next year. So something, again, you should be very well aware of. I do advise all my students to download the BBC app on your phones. If you just refresh it twice or thrice a day, and at this stage, because you've already done economics at year 12, there is a lot you'll be able to relate to. Every time you see a news article, stop back and say, okay, how does this affect my macroeconomic objectives? How does this affect economic growth, unemployment? Oh, what's the government now going to do? So, for example, the other day, there's an article which said on the BBC that VAT has been cut, the government's cut VAT from 20% to 5%. And, so again, if you see something like that, you should stop and think, okay, how is that going to affect my macroeconomic objectives? And as from your year 12 knowledge, you should sit and think, okay, is there any effect on my aggregate demand? Remember the AD equation? You think about that, right? So for example, if we've got, let's put the AD equation here for us all, it's a quick reminder. We've got C, we've got I, G, X, and M. Consumption, investment, government spending, exports, and imports. I'm sure you will remember this from year 12. So if we're looking at this, and for example, the government's cut VAT from 20% to 5%. So that's going to encourage consumption, which is C. So automatically, when you're reading an article like that, you'd say, so this affects consumption. People are going to consume more because remember, coronavirus right now, there's a lack of demand. People are not spending. People are not spending in terms of, buying goods. People are not spending in terms of, going to restaurants and so on. So what the government is trying to do is boost aggregate demand. So remember what's happening right now, our aggregate demand is falling, right? So again, on your diagram, if you've got my LRAS and I've got my AD, what's happening is our aggregate demand is shifting to the left. Remember to always label your axes, you're going to get marked down in an exam. If you don't have that, we've got price level and real GDP. You've got LRAS, you've got AD, and it's shifting to the left. And this is where we can show, it's a different color here. Initially, I was at Y1, I'm now at Y2, I'm now at Y3. So what's happening here is I've got a oops. There we go. I've got a fall in GDP. Remember, a fall in GDP leads to negative economic growth, which is why we're going into a recession now. Going back, remember, recession is when you've got 6 to 8 months of negative economic growth. And that's what we have right now. We've got a fall in GDP, again, going from Y1 to Y2 to Y3, fall in GDP. So we've got negative economic growth. So we're now going to think about our macroeconomic objectives. What are we going to have? Number one, we're going to have unemployment. Why are we going to have unemployment? Because firms are going to lay off workers. Don't forget your chains of reasoning for your analysis. Very, very important here. So we're going to have negative economic growth. We're going to have unemployment. Why? Because businesses will lay off workers. Businesses are shutting. Again, going back to the news, John Lewis shutting stores, Debenhams shutting stores, lots of high street stores are shutting down because they can't survive. Boots shutting down some of its stores. When you're shutting down your stores, you don't need your workers anymore. So you're going to lay off workers, which is going to cause unemployment. Remember your chains of reasoning. When you've got unemployment, you're going to run to the government. Again, you covered in year 12. What's going to happen when you've got high unemployment? The more people are going to run to the government and claim benefits. So now you become a strain on government's finances because now the government has to take all this money out of their pockets to spend on benefits. You've got a strain on government's finances. Going back to 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth macroeconomic objective, we therefore have a budget deficit. Remember what's a budget deficit again from year 12? Budget deficit is when government spending exceeds tax revenue. So we're going to have a budget deficit. The other problem we're going to also have because of this Y1 to Y2 to Y3 is we are going to firms may shut down. Why? Because they're not making any money, right? So firms may be shut down due to less revenue or less profits. again. So that's again going to cause more unemployment. And most importantly, a topic you explore in year 13 here, from Y1 to Y2 to Y3, you have something called low equality, or easier but hang on. We're going to have more inequality. Now, this is a topic that has been explored again a lot in in lots of news articles you see right now. They're saying COVID-19 actually causes more inequality. Going back to year 12, and a quick reminder here, inequality, remember, is the gap between the rich and the poor. It's not poverty. Inequality and poverty, two different things, right? Obviously, more poverty does cause more inequality, but it's not the same. Inequality is the gap between the rich and the poor. And now we're actually having a larger gap because a lot of people are saying and looking at and writing articles on how COVID-19 has impacted the poor more than the rich, right? For example, the poor people, for example, are in jobs that you can't possibly work from home. The poor, the middle income, possibly in jobs that you can't necessarily work from home, whereas the rich probably running their own businesses or working from home and have enough savings to still have the same standard of living or to be able to afford their goods. Whereas the poor, the middle income may be now losing their jobs, may now have to go into their job, putting their lives at risk. And also in globally, in the global context, which is again something you're going to do in year 13, is how they're going to look at how COVID-19 has impacted the world in mainly the less developed countries. For example, in countries like India and Pakistan, where you have people that live in very small houses. You've got about say 20 people living in a house, for example. If one of them does contract COVID-19, there's only so much they can do in terms of self-isolation and so on. So the spread of COVID-19 in such areas due to housing shortages and poverty is a lot more. And they're talking about how it affects less developed countries and the poor and the middle income a lot more than the rich, which causes inequality. So again, something very interesting that you need to look into. Again, any articles you see on inequality and COVID-19, make sure you read up on that. Very, very important. Going back here to this diagram, we can see here, if I was to look at the y-axis and just put lines across, what's happening, to my price level here. Initially, it was, I would say, at P1, let's call that P1, went down to P2, went down to P3. So my price level is falling. And if you remember again, back from your year 12 knowledge, we're having deflation. Currently, we've got our inflation levels or price level being at 0.5%, is the lowest it's been in quite a few months now. And there's a danger of it going even further down as our AD keeps falling. I'm going to pull up an article here that we can look at. So that's from the BBC. We've got UK economy shrinks 20.4% in April 2020. Again, very important for you to know how to read your graphs here. If you look here, we've got GDP growth in percentages from 1997 all the way to 2020. And this is when we had the recession. Again, a very important topic in terms of application. If you pull out the old papers, the old A-level papers, slightly older, I'd say between 2008 to 15, a lot of questions on the Great Recession would come up. Now, if you look there, we had the UK GDP was shrinking by no more than 1% in a single month. So we're going 7, 8, 9, and so on, right? And then we started recovering there. But if you see here, March 2020 is that line before, that's monthly. So that looks like March 2020, followed by April 2020. Our first full month in lockdown was April 2020. And I think it was roughly end of March that we went into lockdown. So we still had, some GDP, some production throughout March till, we went into complete lockdown. When we went into complete lockdown, which is April, the first full month, look at how much our GDP fell by, negative 20.4. It's not happened all the way since then, if you can see. So it's a very, very big deal for A, macroeconomic objectives, B, for the government, because now the government has to step in and try and support your economy, your workers, your businesses in so many different ways, way more than it had to back then. So again, knowing how we had negative economic growth back then as opposed to now is something you should also know, be able to compare what caused the recession back then, what's going to cause the recession now. If we see here, it explicitly states that contraction is 3 times greater than the decline seen during the whole of the 2008 to 2009 economic downturn, which is a big, big deal for the government, because it's now up to the government to pull the economy back up. From your year 12 knowledge, what does the government do? Fiscal and monetary policies. Something you've learned. So again, a lot of real world application, because now the government has used different monetary policies. It's used interest rates. We've also, by the MPC, we've also had quantitative easing. So we've done 2 rounds of quantitative easing already. First one was 200 billion in March. The second one was 100 billion again in June. We also had interest rates on the 11th of March, dropped the first time, and then it dropped again on the 19th of March, just a week later. And currently it's at 0.1%. Very, very important. It's the lowest it's ever been in the history of the UK in 325 years. So very, very important for your application. You could literally have a question on your essay for 25 marks, just saying evaluate the effectiveness of monetary policies that the government used during the coronavirus crisis. How effective do you think they were? Right. So again, an evaluation question. So it's similar to monetary policy essays you may have done before. So seeing a question like that, it's not a problem. You say, oh yeah, monetary policy essay, I can handle that. The question really is, can you apply worth 4 marks? Because that would straight away drop you, even if you do everything else perfectly, straight away, you've already dropped down 4 to 5 marks. So you have to be very, very careful as to knowing where to put in your application. So, going back to my board here, we've got a price level falling, we've got all of this strain on government's finances. Another example I'd like to pull out here is how we had the furlough scheme. I'm not sure how many of you have been following up on it, but again, a very, very important source of application, how the government's been helping. So government's helping a lot of businesses, right? The government is, helping businesses survive. Why again? Because if businesses shut down, we're going to have unemployment. So again, the whole idea is government support to businesses, to workers. And here, as we see, we've got almost 9 million workers are now covered by the UK furlough scheme. April 23rd was, the first month where we had applications almost reaching 4 million. Look at it by June 7. 9 million workers were covered by the UK furlough scheme. Now, of course, it's very, very expensive for the government to do. But at the same time, why is the government doing this, and why did it implement this in the first place, is to stop unemployment. Because remember, unemployment, you run back to the government and claim benefits, which comes under the claim and count. So to stop that from happening, or to reduce the amount of unemployed workers, the government implemented the UK furlough scheme. Right now, the issue with that is now, even though a lot of in evaluation, again, something you can use as an evaluation point. So for example, you make a statement here saying, UK furlough scheme was very successful because when the government did this, a lot of businesses were able to survive. But then in evaluation, you could say that once, the economy did open up and the government allowed, easing restrictions and opening shops and businesses, what did happen was a lot of them shut down. And what that basically showed was how much they were struggling in the first place. And that shows, that's a good point for evaluation, because that shows that although the UK furlough scheme, yes, did work, but to an extent. Remember, back to our evaluation techniques, what do we ask ourselves? To what extent did it really work, or to what extent is this really true? Right, so that's how we can evaluate. Another statement I could make is, a lot of businesses shut down because of COVID-19, right? A lot of businesses shut down, a lot of businesses, had to shut down some of their branches, if not shut entirely, and that became a big problem. But you could evaluate that by, however, lots of businesses have been booming. If you look at Netflix, if you look at Zoom, if you look at Amazon, if you look at delivery services, they've all been booming. And, the reason being now because more people are spending time at home, more people are now doing everything online, everyone's working from home. And because of all of that, you actually have some businesses that are booming. So remember, good evaluation again, right? Yes, businesses are suffering, but not all of them. Some of them actually have experienced a lot of growth. So again, something you could look into, make sure you know businesses that have shut down, businesses that have struggled. Again, not enough to say, you know, um, a lot of businesses shut down. Again, you have to go into the specifics of it. Which businesses in particular having the months down would even be better, right? For example, here, I could say for application, the government supported a lot of workers through the UK furlough scheme. But an A or an A star answer would say, during the coronavirus, the government supported a lot of workers during their UK, through the furlough scheme. Almost 9 million workers were by June 7 covered by the furlough scheme. So very important to have your facts and figures, not enough to just say, oh yeah, coronavirus government policy to help was the furlough scheme and explaining it. That's not enough. You have to say when it was, by how much. So start learning these facts and figures, start putting it down. I usually advise my students to make an Excel sheet with some columns, one of them being the topic. For example, say this is to do with unemployment. So in my first column, I'd say unemployment, or employment. Second column, I'd probably paste the link. So when I want to look at it later on directly, I can just click on it and it opens up. The third one, I could probably put just the title of the topic on the page so I know what it's really related to. So that helps a lot, because by the end of it, you don't have to sit and be like, oh, hang on a second, I did read about the furlough scheme. It's just easy to just go through your Excel sheet and just look for where it says furlough scheme and just click on it. Closer towards the exam, that would help you retain information a lot more quicker than spending time putting this together. So every time you see something good on the BBC, you think you can use it for application, stick it on your Excel sheet, and you can always look at that later closer to exams. So that's what we were basically looking at here. You're now going to, in your year 13, go into more detail on your balance of payments and all the different accounts. You're going to look at the impacts of higher government spending, which is what we're having right now. We're having a lot of government spending, which means we're now into a budget deficit. We're spending a lot more than we're receiving from taxes, right? And that could imply that we have high levels of debt. And that means that at some point, the government has to make up for the loss. And remember the term for that. Some of you may have done this in your year 12. Others may explore it more when you come towards year 13, is austerity. Again, you'll see this again on the news a lot. The government is implementing austerity measures or is not thinking of implementing austerity measures. Every time you see the word austerity, it means the government is reducing its spending or increasing taxes. Why? Because it has to make up for its budget deficit. It's had a deficit for long, and at some point we're going to have austerity measures, which is when government will have to reduce its spending or increase taxes, because it can't go on just spending forever. And that's what a lot of people are fearing. And that's why they're hesitant to spend too much right now, because they're expecting austerity measures to happen at some point. So what people right now are doing is, and that's a big reason why AD is falling, because right now people are saving up. We don't know. What if a second wave comes? What if, I lose my job? So what everyone is now doing is saving. So consumption is falling, investment is falling, which is another component of AD, and that's why your AD is falling down. Remember, consumer and business confidence or investment are one of the biggest and the most important parts of your aggregate demand. Consumption being the most important, right? It's about 60 to 65% of your AD. So it's very important for governments to always monitor that consumption levels remain stable, because the minute your consumptions hit, aggregate demand falls apart. And that's exactly what we're experiencing right now, which is a fall in consumption, a fall in consumer spending. Firstly, we had the virus, everything was in lockdown. So people couldn't even go out and spend if they wanted to. Secondly, the other reason why people don't want to spend is a lack of confidence. What if we lose our jobs tomorrow? What if there's a second wave and I lose my job? What if I fall sick and need money for treatments? What if my partner loses her job, for example, or his job, and then I need to step in? So it's all this uncertainty because of COVID-19, which has hit consumption and therefore has hit investment. Business and consumer confidence are linked. When businesses don't spend if consumers aren't spending, because there's no point. So consumption and business, consumer confidence and business confidence are both low at this point. Remember the term for that, you may have done that in um, year 12. It's called animal spirits. That's when you've got low consumer and business confidence. You've got a lack of spending in the economy. So always use that in your exams. Again, remember, terminology is very, very, very important in your exams because it shows the use of economic knowledge. So make sure you use key terms every time you do write an answer, be it your analysis, be it your evaluation. Make sure you have your chains of reasoning when you're doing your analysis. Now, when you're going into year 13, your chains of reasoning or your analysis, the approach would be the same. It would just be in a lot more detail, because the knowledge would be in a lot more detail as well. So that would be expected of you to go into the very base, starting from the very basic, going on to the more complex chains of reasoning. So if we're saying, for example, here, if we see here, there's a fall in GDP, negative economic growth, unemployment, therefore people will claim benefits, unemployed will claim benefits, which will place a strain on government's finances and cause a budget deficit. It's important to go through all of that. This can be shown on the diagram, and then you draw that diagram and you say, as the economy is moving from Y1 to Y2 to Y3, this is what we're having. So it's very important to link your diagram and build on your chains of reasoning. A lot of students tell me, I just don't have enough to write. And that's because you're not linking your diagrams to your chains of reasoning. You must use your diagrams to back up your answer. Going into year 13, you'll have a lot more diagrams as well. So it'll make your chains of reasoning a lot easier as long as you're comfortable and know how to use your diagrams. Always use diagrams to back your answers. Again, I advise students to make diagrams lists and keep looking at it from time to time, so you know how to practice your diagrams and you know how to use it. In year 12, you only had the standard ADAS, but now you have a lot more, especially in micro. This year you have a lot more diagrams as well. So make sure you do use your diagrams. I usually also advise students that when you're flipping through your exam paper at the end, at A level, at the end of year 13, when you are flipping through your exam paper, at least 30% of your paper should be diagrams, should be filled with diagrams. Otherwise, you have definitely lost out on the higher grade that you are trying to achieve. So exam technique going into year 13, very, very important. We will be doing more of this as we look at the topics in more detail going into year 13 over the next couple of weeks. And what I'll also do is go through some exam questions with you as we do topics. so that you're able to see how to use these four main: knowledge, application, analysis, and evaluation, for some of the new topics that you will be exploring in year 13. But up until then, please make sure you are, staying up to date with application in relation to coronavirus, especially going on right now. It's very, very important, and it's very easy marks right now. But, if you're able to just use statistics, use data to back your answers up, that can give you a lot of application marks, and also, again, help you with your analysis as well. So I think that's it. Going forward, we're just going to be exploring these and a few more year 13 topics, which you haven't done so far. We're going to be exploring those into more detail, as well as do some more diagrammatic analysis and look at some more diagrams that you can use in the topics going forward as well. Any questions you have, please do write in the box on Facebook. Michelle, do we have any questions?
No, we haven't actually had any come through. So just one thing I thought it'd be worth checking in with you. You mentioned in the last session that you're writing notes to help students at GCSE, AS, and A level. Will these notes have diagrams? Because you mentioned the importance of diagrams.
Yes, definitely. A lot of diagrams, a lot of tips to help students remember their diagrams as well. A lot of students struggle with not only drawing the diagrams, but a lot of students do ask me, I don't know how to talk about the diagrams. I mean, it's easy to just draw it and stick it in, but a lot of students don't know how to really use that in an answer. So I think in my notes, I will be focusing a lot on how to exactly incorporate not just the diagrams, but also the diagrammatic analysis, as we say, to help students understand how to use them where relevant.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I'm going to give it another minute or so, just in case anyone's got anything that's on their mind. Just in the meantime, I guess, thinking about some of the other sort of key topics. I mean, clearly, the impacts of COVID are important on the macro side. Is there anything that comes to mind on the micro side as a story that people might want to sort of follow in the coming weeks and months?
Well, yeah, a lot. So in the micro side, we look at the impacts on, again, the particular economic agents. So, for example, the labor market. That's a very big topic in micro year 13. So that's something students should follow up as well. I mean, it's linked to unemployment, of course, but it's more about, what's happening to the demand and supply of labor right now. That's another market. Like so far, we've only been speaking about the goods market, but you also have the labor market. Then you also have the financial market, which involves banks, which is mainly linked to the recession of 2008, but also some of the banks are now affected as well because of COVID-19. So definitely labor market, financial markets, important topics. Also in microeconomics, we look at the impacts on, we don't look at what's happening to, for example, businesses as a whole. We look at what's happening to an individual business. So for example, knowing why exactly did Boots close some of its stores is important. Whereas from a macro perspective, you can just say XX businesses shut down and that caused unemployment. Whereas from a micro perspective, you have to be able to tell, for example, let's take a simple example. We had the price of ventilators at the start of COVID-19. They jumped up by 3 times just within a week. I think it was £20,000 to about, I think it jumped up to 70 from what I remember roughly, just within a week. And again, knowing that from a micro perspective as to why that happened, again, very important for year 12 and year 13 students, because they would be able to say, okay, that's because demand was increasing by a lot, which pushed up the price. Right. So again, things like that. Also things like, we've had shortage of hand sanitizers. There was a point where, there was a shortage of hand sanitizers, cleaning wipes, all of that. And again, knowing whether the issue was really a demand side or a supply side. So in micro, that's what you're basically looking at. You're looking at any demand and supply analysis. You're looking at elasticities. You're looking at labor market. You're looking at costs of production for firms. A lot of firms are struggling because they have higher costs of production now, and that's why they're shutting down. it's important to know it's not just the demand because of which firms are struggling, it's also the supply side, right? You have a shortage of supply because it's not coming through for various microeconomic reasons and macroeconomic reasons as well. So I would definitely suggest those are important bits to look at and follow up on, more at individual businesses, individual workers, individual industries. I think those are all important topics that students should concentrate on.
Yeah, and just I guess contrasting that retail element. So you mentioned that the likes of Boots, who obviously have the bricks and mortar type stores. They might have an online component as well, but on the other hand, you've got the likes of Amazon, which are effectively online only, and you see perhaps a shift in consumer behavior from normal sort of ordinary high street type consumption to online consumption of goods. So that'd be quite interesting, I guess, as well for your students.
Yeah, I think that's a big jump, how everything's going online now, and that's very important to understand as well, because you know if you can do things online, a lot of businesses, a lot of firms are just getting their workers to now work from home, for example. So it's just like, if you can work and operate online, I think that's why a lot of businesses are shutting down as well, because you can just sell online, reduce your cost that way as well. But then that has the negative impact of obviously causing unemployment. But that can be evaluated in saying, well, it is opening up employment in other sectors, because you still need people to be doing that from home or from wherever they're working. So in some ways, yes, maybe if you're stacking shelves at a shop, you can't do that anymore. But now if it's shutting down and going online, but then you've got more opportunities opening up in terms of working online, which is again something students should think about. It's not just about, oh, businesses are shutting down, so everyone's losing their jobs, because in evaluation, it could actually create more jobs. You don't know.
Yep, and that's obviously a nice segue into things like supply side policies and what you can
Yeah.
do to make labour markets more flexible. I'm not going to dwell on that because I'm sure you and I, as economists, could talk about this for a lot longer. So I think we should probably wrap up the session there. It doesn't look like we've got any questions coming through. So if any of you did join the session late, you've got the option to watch it from the beginning. It'll be there to watch on the Facebook wall. Do also please like and share the post. We also like feedback, so if there's anything that you particularly enjoyed about the session, please do let us know. Anything else that we might want to watch out for or cover in future sessions, that's always appreciated too. The other comment I guess to make is this is the first of 8 sessions. This first session is for free, as you've seen today, available on Facebook. Future sessions will be in sort of smaller online classroom environments where students will get to have a much more interactive session with Zara and get to ask questions a lot more fluidly. So please do book onto that. The link to book on that onto those sessions is on our Facebook post. So the last message for me today is thank you all for joining, and thank you especially Zara for leading what was a lovely session. Thank you again.
No problem. You're welcome. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.